Hello and welcome. Willowbrook of Loughborough were founded in 1927. They became well known for building a wide range of bodies on buses and coaches. So to give you a little insight into how varied their output was, here's some of the stuff they have produced and been involved with over the years. In the 1960s, they helped finish off some of the D9s for Birmingham Middle and Motor Omnibus Company. They bodied AEC Reliances for Green Line and built bodies on some of the last AEC Regents built. In the mid-60s, they started building bodywork on Leyland Atlanteans. And you'll recall me talking in a previous video about how Alexander restyled the Leyland Atlantean by fitting it with all curves and things like that. Well, the Willowbrook Atlanteans, they were completely different as well. They were more boxy and not quite as curvaceous, but they featured fiberglass mouldings at the front and a strange fiberglass ribbed front dome as well. But they still looked to be very handsome vehicles. Now, I'm not sure if any of these Willowbrook Atlanteans actually survived, to be honest with you, into preservation. It would be nice if they did, but I'm not too sure. I haven't actually managed to find any evidence of any surviving. In the 1970s, the National Bus Company was after some lightweight vehicles, and one of the bodybuilders for these was Willowbrook. And these were mostly fitted to lightweight chassis like Bedfords. 1968 would see the launch of the bus grant, where the government would pay a subsidy towards operators for buying new buses, and this was to encourage operators to buy buses that were suitable for one-man operation. Now, obviously, with the government funding a percentage of the purchase for each vehicle, this meant that bus operators and bus companies around the country who were eligible for the grant decided to buy new vehicles. And companies like Eastern Coachworks, who were in full swing bodying Bristol VRs and Leyland Atlanteans for the National Bus Company, as well as other operators, were pushed to maximum capacity. Park Royal, who had also bodied buses for the National Bus Company, on Leyland Atlantean chassis at least, were also pushed to maximum capacity, as they were building buses in bulk for London Transport, this being the famous London Transport DMS class fleet lines. In the mid-1970s, they were also developing the Leyland Titan, as well as building sizable orders for PTEs like Greater Manchester Transport. In some cases, this would cause delays, and buses ordered, say, in 1975, sometimes wouldn't turn up until late 1976, early 1977. And this obviously wasn't ideal, as buses do have a set lifetime, normally around 15 years under the requirements of the National Bus Company. Although lightweight buses, such as the Bristol LH, were only meant to have a lifespan of around 7 years. The National Bus Company would have to look for a new source for these bodies to get the supply of vehicles moving and out to the operators. And that source was, of course, Willowbrook. In 1977, Willowbrook built bodywork on a batch of Leyland Atlanteans for Tyne and Wear PTE. And these were much more curvaceous than their predecessors, although they still had something of that Willowbrook look to them. They featured curved windscreens both upstairs and downstairs, and strangely a near side staircase. Incidentally, when these buses were first built, they failed the tilt test and had to have the suspension tweaked a little bit to help them get through it. Now, I'm not sure if when the National Bus Company approached Willowbrook as to whether it laid down specifications for a certain style of bodywork, or whether it thought it was going to end up with this style with the near side staircase. In February 1978, the first of these Bristol VRs with Willowbrook bodywork appeared, and these were for Northern General. Compared to the standard Eastern Coachworks bodywork that we all came to know and love when it came to Bristol VRs, the Willowbrook bodywork was very boxy. However, it had a certain kind of crispness about it and looked surprisingly modern, especially when compared to the aforementioned Eastern Coachworks bodywork. It was built to a style that was referred to as the second generation. this referring to it being the second generation of rear engine bodies. And this is a very sweeping descriptive term that covers a wide range of bodywork from a wide range of bodybuilders. They did all kind of follow a set standard design, normally 4 windows downstairs and 5 and a bit windows upstairs. Classic examples of the next generation style bodywork are things like the DMS and the Manchester Standard, Atlantean and Fleet lines, as well as the Park Royal bodywork on the Leyland Atlanteans. It would also normally be fitted with a curved windscreen of some kind, whether it was a BET style windscreen or the rather sorrowful looking Alexander style one that London Country went for. And the Willowbrook bodywork on these Bristol VRs was to this style. Now it compared quite favourably to the MCW bodywork that had been fitted to a batch of Series 2 Bristol VRs for West Midlands PTE. In all, 3 operators would take this Willowbrook style bodywork. Interestingly, one of them wasn't actually in the National Bus Company. The first, as I said, was Northern General. The second would be the East Kent Road Car Company down in Kent. And the third would be City of Cardiff. Altogether, there was 83 of this style bodywork built on Bristol VR chassis, with the bulk of them, 29, going to Northern General. East Kent followed with 28 and Cardiff had 26. And although they all looked the same and looked to be of a standard design, there were little detailed differences when you looked a little bit closely amongst the batches and the different specifications for each of the operators. For example, the Bristol VRs for Northern General were all fitted with the Leyland 501 engine, whilst East Kent's were all fitted with the standard Gardner 6LXB. The bodywork on both the Northern General and the East Kent ones were identical. Cardiff's Willowbrook Bodied Bristol VRs also featured a Gardner 6LXB engine, but their bodywork differed in having sliding windows as opposed to the hopper windows as fitted to the Northern General and the East Kent buses. It would also appear on some of the Cardiff buses that they weren't actually fitted with fog lights from new, even though the holes were there on the panel for the fog lights, and this did tend to give the Cardiff ones a bit of an unfinished kind of appearance. All the Willowbrook Bristol VRs were bodied to a height of 14'6". Well, here's the interesting thing. They were actually plated up as 14'6", but having measured TFN 980T, I can assure you that it's actually nearer to 14'8", or indeed it was until the roof vents were removed from the top of the roof, as these stopped it from going into the garage. Unlike the Eastern Coachworks bodywork where the roof vents are at the side, these are more up onto the actual top of the roof itself and protrude above the height of the bus. In keeping with the bodywork built by Eastern Coachworks to 14'6" on their Bristol VRs and some of their Leyland Atlanteans, you passed through the doors, up a small step onto a platform by the cab door. Just beyond the cab door, between there and the stairs to the upper saloon, was a further step up into the lower saloon. This, on the East Kent buses at least, catching out many unwary passengers who fell forwards and face planted the saloon floor, despite the fact there was a big yellow sign on the cab door with an arrow pointing down saying "Mind the step." All the Willowbrook Bodied Bristol VRs were also single door buses and seated 43 on the upper deck and 31 on the lower deck, giving a total of 74 passengers. They were also fitted with a front dash panel that resembled the Eastern Coachworks Bodied Bristol VRs, but it wasn't identical. The grille was slightly more coarse and slightly shallower than the one fitted to the Eastern Coachworks body. The buses had fairly normal service lives, and speaking to the former East Kent drivers who used to drive the Willowbrook Bodied VRs there, these were more popular than their Eastern Coachworks counterparts because the Willowbrook bodywork actually had better heating in the cab. And for anyone that's ever driven a Bristol VR in cold weather, you will know that that heating is a very big deal. When withdrawal came for the Willowbrook Bodied Bristol VRs, many went on to see use with other operators, including a former Northern General bus, DGR 874S, which went to Black Prince of Morley in Leeds. This became quite well known at the time, as it was painted to resemble two Bristol REs stacked on top of each other. Many of the former East Kent Willowbrook Bodied Bristol VRs ended up with London coaches and were to be found in London on sightseeing duties. Some were open-topped and some were kept as a closed-top vehicle to substitute in bad weather. Whilst with London coaches in true London transport style, they were given the code BW, Bristol Willowbrook. These tended to come out of service in the late 90s and around 2000. And I remember seeing some of them while I was driving buses up in London, and it was quite strange to see a little bit of East Kent with the TFN and the PJJ registrations driving around up there in full London coaches livery. After use with London coaches, many of them were later exported, some to America and a couple over to Denmark. Companies such as Big Apple Tours and Grey Line managed to find work for these buses in the States. But by the mid-2000s, the surviving vehicles in the United States were all stored in a field in Georgia, awaiting a decision on their future. One was later sold to a guy to use as a float in the Mardi Gras parades, whilst others were cannibalised for this vehicle to get it back on the road. So potentially there may be at least one left in the United States. The surviving buses in the UK slowly dwindled away, with some ending up as film location vehicles, which is a popular use for old double-decker buses. In 2007, I remember paying a visit to Alan Hardwick's yard up in Carlton in Yorkshire, just out of nosiness and to see if he had any spare parts that I could use on SKL 681X. And sitting forlornly in the corner of the yard was TFN 989T, nearly complete apart from an engine and gearbox which had been removed. I do regret not being in a position where I could have done more to try and save this old girl, because there could have been at least two closed-topped Willowbrook VRs now saved. But alas, I was not in a position where I could do anything to help. And the one saving grace was that some of the parts went on to help restore RVB 977S, the Pride of Thanet, the East Kent open top example. Unfortunately now there are just two Willowbrook Bodied VRs left in the UK that are in preservation, unless of course you know anything different, and I would love to hear from you if you do know of any that are tucked away in barns. If I had a granny, I would probably quite happily exchange her or sell her for another Willowbrook Bodied Bristol VR. The first and probably most well known one that's preserved is former East Kent RVB 977S, the open top, which encountered a low bridge at Chesterfield Station between Herne Bay and Whitstable early on in its career, and strangely enough wasn't repaired but was converted to full open top, and was regarded by many of the drivers at East Kent to be the best open top bus that East Kent had had for many years. The other surviving bus is the only roofed example of a Bristol VR with Willowbrook body left in the world, and that is TFN 980T, now in the hands of the Southern Counties Omnibus Collection. Although she's not been on the road for many years, she is very, very slowly undergoing a full body overhaul and is still a very, very much loved member of the collection. In fact, she's one of the buses I used to go to school on, so I have a very special bond with 980. Willowbrook went on to build very similar bodywork on Dennis Dominators for Merseyside and Maidstone District. These were to a higher build, almost to the staggering height of 14'10", which restricted their use in many places. The bodywork was also used to body Leyland Atlanteans, again for Merseyside transport. Willowbrook would go on to build more vehicles for the National Bus Company, but these were coaches. First up was the rather futuristic looking, probably Willowbrook's words, not mine, space car coach body. And this would be followed by the 003, which to be fair was quite an attractive bus, but it was a bit of a blend of the Duple Dominant stroke Plaxton Supreme and didn't really do anything new. Sadly, the Willowbrook bodywork wasn't known as the most structurally sound bodywork. I've heard stories from the old garage hands at East Kent who accepted the buses when they were new, saying that sometimes the upper deck floor was out almost an inch from the near side than it was from the offside. And even on 980 today, you can still see there's a few bits where the floor didn't quite meet the side of the bus, and they've just put some plates over the top to try and make it look all nice and tidy. But yet other people have said the bodywork was actually tougher than the Eastern Coachworks bodywork and didn't corrode or fall apart. So if you didn't mind the wonky upper deck and gaps in the floor, all was good. So what's your memories of the Willowbrook Bodied Bristol VRs? In fact, the Willowbrook Bodied buses in general for the National Bus Company. I'd be interested to hear if you have any memories, or indeed if you know of any surviving Willowbrook Bodied Bristol VRs. I will be your best friend for life, and I will love you long time if you find one of those. I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and share it, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my future releases and uploads in this and my other series here on YouTube. And don't forget to check out my other videos here on YouTube. There's going to be something for the bus enthusiast of good taste, just like yourself. By watching this video, you are helping old buses like TFN 980T see out their retirement in some form of comfort. All money raised goes to looking after the buses, and that makes you an absolutely amazing human being for doing that. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now.